As we all know, forest conservation and restoration is one of the most critical climate mitigation and adaptation tools available, equally crucial for restoring nature and biodiversity. And there is an increasing number of private sector investors active in nature-based solutions because of the steep targets under the Paris Agreement that requires governments, companies and financial institutions to act. But funding is still not deployed at the scale needed. To give you an indication, UNEP calculates the finance for nature-based solutions currently around 133 billion US dollars a year, of which private investments only marks up 14%. If the world is to meet its climate change, biodiversity and land degradation targets, investment in nature-based solutions need to at least triple in real terms by 2030 and increases fourfold by 2050. This means we need to act. This lack in funding has to do with the complex nature of forest landscape projects and the lack of professional technical capacity available across the project lifespan, from design to implementation and to scaling. And on the other hand, fund managers often have limited funding available to cover the resource-intensive project development stage, which leads in a reduced pipeline of investment opportunities and ultimately in a reduced level of investments. Carbon markets offer a pathway to deliver to this so needed private finance for saving and restoring tropical forest landscapes while we work to decarbonize the global economy and deliver on NDC pledges. So it's important to develop an investment-ready project pipeline for corporates to act. Treevive aim is to do so and to bridge the gap between forest and finance. How did we start it? Well, it was in 2021 when I was still with FFC. I organized together with another lady a workshop with a group of conservation NGOs and project developers to identify what is needed to develop an investment-ready project and to address this pipeline bottleneck. Three main outcomes were: one, a financing need for the first development stages of a project. Second, TA assistance need for project development, mainly focusing on developing a robust business model, carbon certification, and local stakeholder processes. And third, a trustworthy party to link projects to investors and to international carbon markets. Based on these outcomes, FFC Netherlands and Forum International decided to develop the business plan for Treevive. And I personally got so enthusiastic about the idea that I decided to set up and run Treevive and to bring in my experiences and network. Treevive is powered by Forum International and builds on 30 years of experience in developing and implementing tropical forest landscape projects and understands both the forest and finance world. Forum International has an extensive track record and experience in the design, development, implementation and management of forestry projects. They had successfully implemented own landscape restoration projects in Ghana and Tanzania, now starting in Peru and also exploring new possibilities in Ghana. Forum also has experience in forestry investment and extensive due diligence processes, forest and carbon certification, and they do all types of forestry-related consultancies for a wide range of customers worldwide. So, we are a group dedicated professionals that work with local forest owners and offer pre-finance hands-on technical support to develop their tropical forest carbon landscape project and connect these projects to investors and international carbon markets. This results in an expansion of investment-ready forest carbon landscapes projects on the market, an increase in the so needed climate finance for these projects, and impacts for local communities, climate and nature. With Treevive, we transfer project ideas into high-quality, investable forest carbon projects. We develop robust business cases, including the carbon assets. We incubate the project and their social and environmental benefits. We make sure the project gets certified to meet market and ESG criteria, and we connect these projects effectively to investors and carbon markets. On an average, Treevive invests per project between 100 and 600K. If applicable and needed, we also support the local forest manager to attract core funding for implementing the project. Carbon credit delivery starts in 8 years. depending on the project type, and we arrange long-term carbon offset contracts for these projects. And what is very important to mention is that we have a revolving structure. This means generated revenues will pre-finance new projects. So we are focusing on tropical landscapes, afforestation, reforestation, revegetation, REDD+, improved forest management, and we develop fully new greenfield projects, or we validate and market existing projects. I need to move to the next slide. Sorry, people, but there is some delay here. Yeah. Currently, we are working with 10 projects for development and sales, varying from restoration projects in Peru, agroforestry projects in Nicaragua. Oh, I have a terrible echo. Agroforestry projects in Nicaragua, Colombia, and conservation projects in, for example, Congo, Liberia, and Mozambique. Back to Michelle now, who will introduce Evelien to us.
Michelle, you are muted.
I hope you can hear me now. As you can see, we're not professionals in moderating a session, either hosting a session. We're professionals in developing forest carbon projects. Like I said, if you have any questions to Lisbeth or the other speakers, please feel free to put them in the chat, because that gives us a sense of feeling how you're engaged with the message that we're sending. I would like to introduce the next speaker. This is Evelien Trines, Senior Forestry Expert at Form International, and she has an extensive background in the private and public sector, in which she's had the boots on the ground in many countries when it comes to sustainable forest management, verification, but also project design on both, let's say, the more forestry related aspects such as FSC, but also carbon related aspects such as VCS. She's also had the boots on her desk, so to say, as she worked for institutions like the World Bank, the IPCC, and the UNFCCC Secretariat. And I think that when I dove into her resume, I was quite surprised and almost humbled. That's the word I was looking for. That she had an award for her contribution in the Nobel Peace Prize of the IPCC in 2007. So very proud to have Evelien on this call. Evelien will share some valuable insights on how to develop a high-quality carbon project and also the lessons learned from Form International. So Evelien, if I may ask you to take the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I think after that introduction, it can only go downhill from here. But I'll share my screen with you. Let me see. No, this is going wrong. Share. Fensters. That one. Okay, now I need to find the button of the... Yes, now we're here. Thank you. Yeah, I'll talk about some technical aspects, but before doing so, I want to run by a couple of statistics that are relevant to understand the world of forestry carbon. Agriculture is causing 70% of the global deforestation, and deforestation and forest degradation together are causing 30% of climate change. And then we're talking about some 6 million hectares of forest that we're losing every year. 70 to 80% of the farmland is occupied by family farms, which I myself found a surprising statistics when I first heard about it. They are generating over 80% of the world's food. Now, the family farms, there's over 570 million of them, and some 70% has less than 1 hectare. So we're talking smallholder farming. This is important when we come to talk about your project area. Obviously, the global population is still growing from some 7 billion in 2010 is going up to 10 billion in 2015. That's the estimate. So the overall food demand will go up by approximately 50%. And the animal-based food, because we're becoming wealthier and wealthier all the time, will go up to 70%. So the take-home messages from this is that with the current land use practices, we need a lot more land to feed all the mouth. And wherever you go, you will bump into people because the family farms are spread out through the world, little plots everywhere. Now, in terms of forest carbon project types, I think most of you will be familiar with the 3 main categories. There are subcategories under all of those, and for each of those, there are specific rules. That is something to take into consideration when you are a novice in the forest carbon sector, because the rules are pretty strict and sometimes also quite complex. So just to show you a couple of images here from different project types or situations that you can bump into in the field. Top left, you see a heavily locked over rainforest in Malaysia. We know from research that if you log over a forest too intense, it will have the tremendous difficulties growing back. You'll get pioneer species, climbers, vines that take decades to be replaced by secondary species, and the primary species you probably never get back. So these are types of forest, when they're not too trashed, you can still introduce a sustainable forest management system with reduced impact logging. In the middle, at the bottom, you see an extraction road in reduced impact logging. All the logging is planned up front, so you extract the trunks over the same skid trail all the time. And if you want, on the right side, you can replace some of the gaps or fill them with desirable species, high-value timber species, or also high-value fruit trees, anything that you that has your preference. Now, this is an image of the planned deforestation. It's a subcategory of REDD+, avoiding planned deforestation. This is in the Bolivian lowlands in the eastern side of the country, part of the Amazon watershed. People from the Altiplano are basically brought to the lowland and are given a spot in the forest to build a new livelihood. And they get a small area, build a farm and start farming. You see in a 25-year period, bottom left, all the pink areas are deforested area, basically agricultural land. The light green is degraded forest, and the more dark one is the existing forest. But you can see how fast all of the forest is being eaten away. And then the big purple parts, you see them on the bottom right side, are bigger companies moving in, leasing the land from the local people to grow agro-commodities, in this case, soybeans. So any project being able to deal with this has a good chance of being truly additional. Now, there are obviously a lot of challenges. Sometimes people have been saying, oh, land use change and forestry, low-hanging fruit, easy to do. You can make a quick buck. There's also companies now selling themselves as designing your project purely based on remote sensing, remote satellite imagery, etc. I'm sad to say that's simply not possible. There's many challenges to overcome. And one of them where we stumbled on when we first moved into this area of carbon forestry projects was a couple of decades ago in Ghana. A license to operate a project in an area. We got the government approval after a couple of years of negotiations and thought, okay, now we're home free, hunky-dory, we go in. But then, of course, we bumped into all the local people who are using the land here and there, and we needed to still start with stakeholder consultation and integrating them into our project design. So this is something that you need to be mindful of when you start a project. Always engage your local community as of day one nearly. In Uganda, we are having the same, even in a protected area. When you first put your feet on the ground, you will find that there's people everywhere, activities everywhere, and you need to bring them into your project design. On the other hand, having local people, it's not always a negative. Our asset in Peru is working together with the local population to establish plantations. So that is a plus, that's a bonus. One of the challenges, of course, is the 10-year cutoff date. If an area hasn't been deforested or has been deforested in the last 10 years, it is dismissed its eligibility for carbon credits. Additionality, as I say, you have to demonstrate that the project is there or the situation is changing because of you and your project coming in. Leakage, that's the displacement of activities, especially relevant in REDD+. You have a big leakage zone where you need to quantify the amount of emissions that you basically indirectly cause by moving activities out of your project area into the vicinity of the project. So leakage is a big deal. You can have a lot of mitigation activities to reduce the leakage, and that all of that needs to be quantified. Obviously, the quantification is a challenge, especially when it comes to baselines, because at the moment that you start to implement your project, your baseline becomes counterfactual and you can never demonstrate it anymore. So you must feel like a lawyer building an argument in your project design document, explaining and substantiating all the claims that you make. And then another thing, especially for investors, if a project proponent comes up to you and has a certain claim, don't get overexcited. Sometimes project proponents come up to us and they say, oh, we've got 100,000 hectares. And then you start to zoom in the area. And I see, this is the next slide. And then you start to analyze the area. And on the left, you've got the satellite imagery, the analysis, which is backed up by field work, looking at the different strata and the biomass in the different strata. And you get a type of map like this with all the land cover classes. And then you start to work on carving out all the areas from your project that are not eligible for carbon credits. So you have to think about the 10-year cutoff. You can't claim any carbon credits if it has been deforested more recent. Take out those areas. Then you look at the forest definition. There will still be areas in there that might seem on your satellite image analysis as bare land, but still they are a part of what is falls under the definition of a forest, because temporarily unstocked areas are not non-forest. They are still part of the forest land cover. HCV areas, high conservation value, could be anything from an endemic species to a special wetland, but also cultural sites of cultural significance for the local people. You all have to carve those out. Riparian zones, areas along rivers. If you want to start do planting or forest management, you can't move too close to rivers. Disputed areas, all of that needs to be carved out. And then suddenly, whilst the proponent said, we've got 100,000 hectares, you end up with maybe 25,000 hectares. So this is your first possible setback, but important to analyze, to do your cost-benefit analysis and calculate where your break-even point is in future. So I'm having the same problem now as Lisbeth. I want to move down. Yeah, oh, it's okay. This is I think the last but one slide. Michelle, don't get nervous yet on the time. This is the forest carbon project cycle. Pre-feasibility, that's obviously where you start. Sometimes you want to go in once or in 2 steps to see whether you really have a project. And then you can start with your project development. And once you've done that, there's a lot of studies that go into your project design document, a lot of social studies as well, flora, fauna, etc. You can do your validation. Validation is done by a company that's authorized by in our case, mostly the voluntary carbon standard, the VCS Verra, to do these audits. And then you're already over half a year into the project. If you can do it faster, I would be really impressed. But you have to calculate half a year to maybe a year. And then once you get through validation, you go and do your field work, your monitoring plan, and that is done again being verified by an accredited auditors team. There's 2 to 6 months for that, and it might seem long to you, but they always do field work, desk work, but you also have a period of public consultation where people can express their concerns with the project design and then once it's verified and signed off, the credits can be issued and you can start to market them. So altogether a 2 to 4.5 year exercise to go through the motions. If you're doing it faster, I would be really impressed. If you take longer, you're not the only one. There's project developers that take like 5 to 7 or 8 years to really dot the I's and square the T's. The project period, anything between 20 to 50 years, but you have to update your baseline in between. The last slide. So there's many challenges. It's very important to take your time and do a proper project design. It's really worth its while all throughout the verification process, but also in the implementations, in your relationship with local people and local authority. It's really key. Then, of course, for the investors, it's a long process. You need patient capital. That's a fact of life in this business. Certification to demonstrate the quality of the project you're doing, to basically illustrate to the world, I'm doing it according to the rules all the time. I'm committed. Local stakeholders, bring them in. You can't escape it, and it can be very beneficial. And then at the end of the day, there's going to be huge benefits. Not only the climate change mitigation, the sequestering of carbon, but also the community benefits. You can pull local livelihoods out of an economic deadlock, economic diversifications, changing land use, etc. Most often there's a biodiversity plus, and of course for your reputation if you're a company as well. So the take-home message, you need to be intrinsically motivated to do this. There's no low-hanging fruit in this sector, but once you do it, there's going to be lots of material and non-material rewards that can be really substantive. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, audience, for your attention.
Thank you very much, Evelien. I think there was a lot of information in there that hopefully sounded sometimes familiar, but also as a new lesson to a lot of people. I don't see any questions in the chat. I'm still doubtful whether or not that's a good sign or not, but we'll see later on. I'll have a Q&A also with you, Evelien, after the contribution of David. So to the audience, if you have any questions, either to Lisbeth, to Evelien, or to David, the next presenter, please put them in the chat. David, I'll introduce you shortly. You're the chairman of Levasflor. You oversee the governance of this sustainable forest management company. You will explain later on. You have about 15 years of experience, both in private equity and management consultancy. You're based out of Sweden, so forest must be in your heart. It can't be any different. And we look forward to hearing from you from the practical aspects of developing a forest carbon project, in this case in Africa. So please, David, go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle. Is my screen seen?
Yep, we can see it clearly.
Very good. So, welcome to the Miombo woodlands. It's actually the second largest forest system in the world, second only to the Russian taiga. It's covering 10 countries in southern Africa. International attention to its importance, both in terms of carbon and biodiversity, is increasing right now. Also, it is the home of at least 100 million people living in the forest and living from the forest. The region is extremely poor. We are talking about the poorest parts of many of the poorest countries in the world. And poverty, together with rapid population growth, are clearly the biggest drivers of deforestation, which is accelerating. And mainly it's a question of slash and burn agriculture for mere survival. So valuable forest resources are destroyed or used to only a small fraction of its value. And to fight deforestation, we must understand this relationship, and we, as a private company, can play a role by focusing on the value part, to create value instead of destroying it, and to give people the chance to live better lives than they do today. So we, that is Levas Flor. It's a Swedish Mozambican forest company. We were founded in 2005. We operate in central Mozambique, where we have our forest, sawmills, and carpentries. We sell wood and wooden products, ranging from railway sleepers up to ready-built houses. We are fully FSC certified for forest management and chain of custody already since 2006. We employ about 180 people, most of which live in our forests or in the very closeness of it. Our philosophy is the same today as it was in 2005. We want to do good for the planet and the people, and we want to make profits. So the profit part is important not only for shareholders, of which I am one, but mainly to serve as a role model, to show that sustainable and legal forestry is good business. We would be very happy if there were more companies like us. So we're proud of our achievements in the planet and people dimensions, and we get a lot of acknowledgement for this. Our forest today contains about 40% more biomass than our neighbor's concession, which had the same starting point in 2005. And our employees and their families live considerably better than they did before. So the profit side is more challenging. Our first profitable year was only in 2018 after 13 years of operations. And profits are still too small and too unstable to enable expansion. We are small, we are subscale, and our shareholders, unfortunately, are not rich. So we simply have not been able to invest enough to get the size needed to realize more than a limited part of the forest value. This is why we are now launching and will be starting raising money later this year for an expansion project that we call Miombo 500, and where carbon finance is one part. Our vision is to preserve and develop 500,000 hectares of Miombo woodland in Mozambique by maximizing its sustainable economic value. The project stands on 3 pillars. First, it's a for-profit company, so that is Levas Flor Plus, let's put it like that. It's built on Levas Flor, but it's adding 3 important new revenue streams. One being carbon finance, second being products like energy and fertilizer out of waste material and residues. And third is to start production more standardized wood materials that are easier to sell internationally, like, for example, veneer and thermally treated wood. Second pillar, Levas Flor Foundation, is a non-profit, and they will focus on developing the local communities, develop livelihoods such as agroforestry, beekeeping, and non-timber products. The third pillar is the Mesasa Institute, which is a research institute, which will focus on our unique, lesser-known species of our forests, to focus to find the best use of them, how to maximize their value. So to the right, we see a Mesasa tree. This is the predominant species of our forest, and the table shows how much value it creates locally and how much work job it creates locally in different options. So in yellow, we see how the majority of forests in Mozambique are used today. To the left, much is just used for illegal charcoal, where the whole tree is used to be chopped up and sold to the local market, creating about $20 of value and 18 hours of work. Next is illegal logging, which mainly means whole logs being shipped to China. Some more value, about $100, but even less work, 12 hours. The third column is Levas Flor today with sustainable forestry. Our products are worth about $290, and with that we need 109 hours of work. And to the right is where we are aiming with our expansion project. By adding the 3 completely new revenue streams that I mentioned, we aim at reaching $1,000 plus of value and even more work created. Finally, our carbon project. So we are happy to have hired Treevive to be our carbon partner and our specialist, and they have started their pre-feasibility study a few months ago. Just a few lessons learned or key takeaways so far. First and most importantly, interactions with government are difficult. Just to understand what rules apply for a carbon project is tremendously complex. We get different answers from different institutions. We do not fully understand the roles of the different governmental institutions, and these rules have been changing even during the last half year a lot. Another and last lesson learned is the time is not the same in Mozambique as in Sweden. We, of course, knew it, but still, it always is surprising. So this needs to be included in time plans and in the financial models. And had I given this presentation maybe 4 months ago, I would have told you that closing is around year end. Now it seems like even by Q1 or end of Q1 is more of like optimistic. But if we meet a year from today on the 2-year anniversary, then I would say that Miombo 500 is a fact. And with that, Michelle, back to you.
Thank you, David, and thanks for sharing these lessons on the ground. There's been some active chatting also on high quality, so I'll just leave it for that. The question I would like to ask to, I think Evelien first, but maybe David, you could respond as well, but you already touched upon it in your last phrase. It's the essence of time, right? So it takes more time than expected. Evelien, you also stated it just takes longer. How does that relate to the global challenge that we have to scale as fast as possible? Because within the next, let's say, decade, we need to solve this issue. How do we see this dilemma moving forward? Evelien, if I may ask you first.
Well, it's the million-dollar question, of course, if we had the answer to that. But I think that the notion of climate change is now so much in our face, and internationally so much money is being made available by donor pledges to do something about it, that we need to find innovative ways to channel that finance to basically the grassroots level where the change needs to occur. And there's a lot of processes and groups of organizations now working on these innovative financial mechanisms to see how we can bring the international donor money to the grassroots level with, of course, some intermediaries in there. Yeah, so that would be my first response to a very tough question, Michelle.
Yeah, thanks. David, anything to respond from your end?
No, I mean, of course, it's an issue. And we know that Mozambique is slow, but I am also finding that also in the rest of the world, in the Western world, everything is slower than I thought. And maybe this is a little bit prejudiced, that me coming entirely from the private sector, stakeholders in Europe engaged in this are mainly non-private. And I can see that maybe it's more bureaucratic than I'm used to from the private sector and takes a much longer time. And maybe there is something to review that the urgency needs to be in all parts of this process in a way.
Yeah, thanks for that. And David, just to let you know, there are a few questions also regarding the Miombo 500 project in the chat. Maybe you could respond to that, and I would like to introduce the next speaker, which is Toby Lewis-Donaldson from FMO. And he's the facility lead, technical assistant facility lead for the Mobilizing Finance for Forests program. It's a mouthful, but I'll let him explain all that's relevant for that. Of his background, he's agricultural economist and he's private sector development specialist. And amongst other things, he lived in Malawi for 4 years working on that. So quite interested to have you on the call, Toby. And I hope you can give some insight in the scope, the interest, but also, I would say, the lens of a development financing agency like yourself, DFI, in financing tropical forest carbon projects. So please share us your knowledge.
Thanks, Michelle, and hi, everyone. Yeah, happy to present. And if I click this, hopefully the slide should come up. And yeah, so I've been with FMO for 2 years now. So not authorized to speak as kind of like the expert in these terms, but I can certainly give you my reflections, and I'm working on Treevive and in the forestry team for that past 2 years. So just to start off, for anyone that's not familiar with FMO, FMO is the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank. Been around since the 1970s, and we invest debt and equity into developing countries. Our mission is to enable local entrepreneurs to through their businesses to achieve sustainable development goals. And we have 3 focus sectors: so agribusiness, food and water, financial institutions, and energy. We invest with the aim of enhancing local prosperity. We aim to take risks that commercial banking sectors are not willing to take. We focus on the private sector. And as I said, one of our focus sectors is agribusiness, food and water. And then within that, we focus on forestry, and that's one of our areas. But across the agribusiness, food and water sector, we're doing more than just forestry in terms of sustainable land use. So please keep that in mind. We try to go beyond financing as well in our role. So we try and be additional in other ways in terms of helping businesses to meet environmental, social, and governance standards, and in terms of technical assistance that we can also provide to help them enhance the value beyond what our investment brings. We have a AAA outlook in terms of our ratings from Fitch's and Standard & Poor's, and we aim to be industry leader in terms of our sustainability ratings. Within FMO, we have our own balance sheet, but then we also manage a number of funds on behalf of governments. So we have various funds that we manage on behalf of the Dutch government, but also the European Commission and the UK government. And I work particularly on one of those programs, which is the Mobilising Finance for Forest programme, MFF. And that's a UK government-funded blended finance programme, which FMO delivers. We have £150 million available to invest in a mixture of funds and direct investments. And the mandate is to invest where the business will incorporate forest protection and restoration into sustainable agricultural production models, or where the business will in some way create value from standing forests. And that's all within the tropical forest belt. So we have a list of countries where can qualify for MFF funding. The aim of MFF is that through providing this concessional capital and also technical assistance, we hope to catalyse additional public and private sector investment of up to £1 billion to combat deforestation and other unsustainable land use practices. So to give a bit of a lens, in terms of how we look at financing NCS, natural climate solutions projects, FMO has been on a journey in terms of expanding its strategic scope. So we started in 2018 with our first forestry strategy, and that focused on brownfield forestry and private equity funds. Why did we focus there? Well, it's I think important to mention that DFIs require solid cash flows and a proven business model. Impact needs to be a given, but also sufficient scale needs to be there for a DFI to be interested and able to invest. And at the time, it was felt that only brownfield forestry in emerging markets could provide all 3 of those factors. MFF and some of the other blended finance programs that we manage enabled us to expand the scope of this strategy. It provides us with funding, and in some cases concessional funding, risk-seeking funding, that can go out and find new investments that we wouldn't be able to do with our own balance sheet. It also allows us to build our internal capacity, which is often a key constraint in DFIs, and I know other investors as well, to doing these kind of novel sectors. And then also our funding partners, the UK government, EC, Dutch government, stimulate us, encourage us, challenge us to look to higher impact sectors, and also we learn from those partnerships as well, in terms of the deals that come to us, but also how we should approach them. And so in those 3 ways, these blended finance programs led to an expansion of our forestry strategy into new NCS sectors that don't have a solid cash flow or have a much longer payback period. So that includes greenfield plantations. It includes plant models where you have a mixture of plantation and conservation, where the conservation element or potentially both elements are generating carbon credits, natural forest management, non-timber forest products, and then other NCS carbon models, though carbon-only models are still unlikely. I think the other major change driving our expansion of our strategic scope has been FMO's climate ambitions. So we have an ambition to have a net zero portfolio by 2050 in terms of financed emissions, and forestry and natural climate solutions have a big role to play in that. So we aim to invest up to €1 billion in forestry by 2030, but it's a relatively new sector, particularly some of these ones I've mentioned here. So it's going to take some time to build up to that scale, and we're going to continue to be doing our kind of core sort of more traditional forestry investments at the same time, because we need to be able to keep demonstrating financial sustainability, because we're here ultimately to mobilize the private sector. And so we need to build a diversified portfolio that focuses on all of these sectors, including the lower risk ones. Next slide is just a bit on why Treevive. So we invested in Treevive in last year, 2022. It's quite a small investment, like all our other natural climate solutions investments so far. At the moment, that's only possible from the government funds that we have. It's something that's new for us, and I think FMO is actually something of a pioneer among the DFIs in terms of moving into the sector. We have an ambition, but it's not going to be realized overnight, and we want to work with credible partners in this space as we learn. So Treevive, with the tie-up that you've heard of, FSC Netherlands and Form International, we saw them as a credible partner with a lot of experience in a sector that's new for FMO, and that means we can benefit from their expertise, and we can share learnings from the multiple NCS subsectors that they work in for our teams. And they also, with the projects that they support, provide a potential pipeline of sort of pre-screened projects that we could potentially co-invest in from other funds. We felt that we were aligned in terms of a high integrity approach to the voluntary carbon market, and I think we're learning together how this plays out in practice. The risk is somewhat diversified by their model of funding different project types with different revenue models. We think that they have the potential through their model to catalyze significant volumes of additional private finance, which is obviously one of our main purposes and objectives for MFF and more broadly as FMO, and the potential to achieve climate impact at scale relative to the size of the investment, because they work on multiple projects, the carbon elements at least of multiple projects. And last slide is just some reflections on lessons learned so far and what the implications might be for projects looking for investment. And maybe I'll just add the disclaimer that these are just my personal reflections from my 2 years working so far, and not an official position, I should say. So ticket size, I think, is a common barrier for DFIs in this sector. Many NCS projects are new or small, or by definition, not scalable. Internal capacity, I think, is often, as I mentioned, a major constraint, because the sector needs a lot of work and expertise to get the deals done. They're complex and they're high risk and new to DFIs, and that means, as we've heard, they take time. And I think so far we've seen carbon credits as both an enabling factor by adding a revenue stream that wasn't there before potentially on NCS projects, but also as a limiting factor because of the integrity and commercial risk that is still seen as quite high. What some of the implications of this are, I think projects looking for investment from DFIs need to be able to communicate their commercial case. Often they've come from a more impact-focused background, so aren't so strong on communicating the commercial case, which needs to be there as a baseline for DFIs to be interested. And projects need to be very clear on how their business model works, and also demonstrate an awareness of the risk, because this is a new sector for a lot of investors, DFIs included. I think DFIs can add significant value in the investment process and beyond, but projects need to be patient because it does take time. I'd say ideally combine carbon credits with other revenue streams, alluding to the point I made earlier. And finally, it may be the case that DFIs are not the right group of investors for some types of natural climate solution projects looking for funding. If you see all the kind of lessons learned so far, and the conclusion might be actually DFIs might not be the right investor in every case. And that's all.
Thank you, Toby, for sharing those insights from the DFI side and also the lessons that you've learned. And I think when it comes to time to reflect on the previous talk that we had with Evelien and a little bit with David, I think from your end, from a government perspective, it always has to be very due diligent, of course, and has to be very careful. And we need to speed up. So this is, as a forest carbon accelerator, at least that explained that we hope we can contribute on that process moving forward. The last branch on the tree or the leaf, so to say, that Lisbeth presented in the beginning was the voluntary carbon market, because we've touched upon the technical aspects, we've touched upon the practicalities on the ground. Toby just shared something from the financial perspective. And I would like to give the floor to Lisa Walker, who is the CEO of Ecosphere Plus and the COO of Available, but I will let her explain how and why that's the case. I have an introduction prepared, but we're 2 minutes behind schedule, so I'll just leave my introduction, Lisa, and give you the floor, because I think a lot of people already know you in this call.
Thanks, Michelle. Can you see my slides and hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
It could be unpresentable. Yeah, excellent.
Great. Okay, so hopefully I can go through here. So yeah, very quickly, thanks for having me. A very, very quick introduction. Abatable is a carbon procurement and market intelligence company, really focused on empowering organizations to take action and have impact for climate, nature, and people. And yes, the news that Abatable acquired Ecosphere Plus a couple of months ago. I was the CEO of Ecosphere Plus. We're one of the leading suppliers and distributors of nature-based carbon credits into the voluntary carbon market. We were founded in 2016 by the Althelia Climate Fund, and we have one of the Althelia Climate Fund investors on this call, which was FMO. So it all kind of comes full circle. In terms of the combined products and services from Abatable, we have a carbon procurement platform which provides access to high quality credits, not only forestry from across the market, but a lot of nature-based solutions where we distribute credits on behalf of high quality investors such as Morova, but we also give access to corporate buyers to the whole carbon market where they can select from, projects from over 2,000 project developers. We also deliver insights from on policy and pricing, which I'll talk a little bit about today. And we do quality assessments, or the Abatable team do on different projects, and provide advisory services to investors, mostly on how to originate and judge projects. Importantly for today's theme, as Ecosphere Plus, we've transacted more than 45 million tonnes of carbon credits. And what that means from that carbon credit transaction is that we've protected more than 1 billion trees. We've got nearly 2 million hectares of forest conserved or restored, more than 200 threatened species, habitat protected, and we've provided thousands of jobs for local people. So, those are really, for me, the core benefits of the carbon market. But turning to what we can expect from the voluntary carbon market, you're looking at here some charts from McKinsey's Global Energy Perspectives reports. On the left-hand side of the screen, this is showing us that under all scenarios, we are going to have negative emissions required within the net zero pathways, and they can obviously be delivered through carbon credits, but we're definitely going to need them. We're not going to, reduce to zero fast enough. But on the right-hand side of the chart, this is looking at the potential growth within the voluntary carbon market. And this is pretty significant. So there's a range of different scenarios there. But if we just look at the black bar in the middle, that's representing analysis of the climate 700 large corporates. So if they stick to those climate commitments, this is the projection of how many carbon credits they're going to need. So you can see here already, even just with those 700 corporates, and they could, of course, there could be more commitments or deeper commitments, that would already mean a doubling of the size of the voluntary market in terms of demand by 2030, and a huge scale up by 2050. So there's definitely an expectation that demand is going to increase. And then if we look at the other side of the market, on the supply side, the supply of carbon credits is going up, but long term, the trend indicates that supply inventory is tightening, and this is going to lead to higher prices. So if you look at the left-hand side of the chart, and the source of these numbers is analysis from Shell and BCG that was published last year. But if you look there, the supply forecast is clearly growth in supply, including for nature-based avoidance credits, so REDD+, forestry conservation, which is good news for standing forests. However, you can also notably see a much larger share being taken over time by removals-based credits, so nature-based removals, afforestation, reforestation, as well as engineered removals, and really not much growth at all in engineered avoidance credits. So that's kind of an interesting picture there. And then on the right-hand side, the data you're looking at here is the difference between issuances and retirements each year. So as you can see, currently the market is in, has a surplus in the inventory or the carbon credit stock available. So the orange bar of issuances is higher than the retirements bar each year. But we can already see that the projection is that as early as next year, that's going to reverse, and there will actually be less issuances than retirements. The red line is the total credit inventory. So you can see that very quickly, actually, that gets completely used up. So the market would be, short, if you like. And that obviously also leads to higher prices. Pricing, if you think about that, there is a really wide range of prices, very highly dependent on project type. The top line here is the price for forestry conservation, REDD+. It's been very volatile, I should say, over the last couple of years, and all credit types are trading now at a lower price to the absolute peak in the market in 2021. But there's a big range of prices there, and that's often because actually there's a large premium for credits that are traded what we call over the counter, OTC, because corporates really want to understand and know which project they're buying from. So there's a large premium for buying directly from projects rather than buying, say, an anonymized or commoditized product on an electronic exchange. And the prices for those credits have almost gone down to zero in the forestry space. And what does this mean for buyers? It means they're starting to get more sophisticated, and they're also starting to think about how to manage their long-term risks and opportunities in this market. So whereas in the past, a lot of activity has been driven by an annual cycle of spot purchases, so calculating the carbon footprint and then going into the market and buying just the credits needed to cover the compensation for that year's activity. But what's happening now is a lot of corporate buyers are starting to think about multi-year agreements, a fixed forward contract where they can lock in a price today. It might still be a rising price over time, but they will have certainty over that budget. And importantly, they're locking in supply so that they know they can access the high quality project or projects that they want to. Many corporates are starting to think about how to combine that with some optionality and flexibility because they don't know exactly how fast they're going to decarbonize. Can they include options within these types of contracts so that they can pay a bit of a premium now, but to reserve that volume and make sure that they can have access at a certain price in the future? We also see an interest in a so-called floating forward contract. This was something that years ago in the CDM market, I've been in this market for more than 20 years, I should say. So, we saw this a lot happening in the past to protect project developers and communities from locking in too lower prices for too long. You could actually tie forward contracts to some kind of market price or index. It's quite complicated to do because today the market's still immature. There's not a really clear reference price, but that's something, an option that could protect people from sort of locking in and selling too low for too long. But all the way down, the end here, we see some corporates actually moving into the investment space themselves, using their own balance sheet to invest directly into projects or funds and, portfolios of projects. A good example of that that we've been involved in as Ecosphere Plus is L'Oreal. So they've now got their own regeneration of nature fund, deploying capital into these nature-based projects and selling the carbon credits.
Lisa, may I ask you to summarize with respect of time?
Yep, sure. So just very quickly, I wasn't going to go dwell on this anyway, but it's just to say that there is a real erosion of trust in the market currently. We do know what a good quality carbon credit looks like, but there's a number of areas that I think we've already heard about today from other speakers that we really need to gather around. I would encourage everybody to look at these different initiatives on the supply side and the demand side. There's a lot of activity going on right now on the integrity, developing core carbon principles, thinking about what claims can be made, thinking about disclosure, regulatory disclosure. So those were the list of initiatives that I would suggest are worth looking at. And finally, from me, I think you wanted some words on how we build trust. For us, we think there's kind of 4 areas we need to also be thinking about. So transparent and fair pricing, effective and equitable governance, meaningful and measurable impacts beyond carbon. We also have a biodiversity crisis. We don't want to be having any perverse trade-offs here, and that there's clear and purpose-led communications, not misleading or overstating communications from companies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. I think a very insightful look at how the voluntary carbon markets are developing, at least from the buyer perspective. So thanks for that. We're approaching 4 o'clock. That's a euphemism, I think, a little bit. I'd like to give the floor to Lisbeth to close it off with some lessons learned on, well, 1 year of Treevive. So just in a couple of minutes, and then we'll close off. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. And probably all of you are thinking, why does he put a fire picture on the screen? Well, effective fire management is very important for good forestry projects. And with this picture, you see a training Forum gave in Ghana on fire management, and that has really reduced the fire damage in that area a lot, with almost 90%. So if you talk about what is working, well, the practical experience of Forum is working. And that is also, I think, one of our successes, that we are building on this track record and DNA of the launching companies, of the team here in-house. And I think that is also the reason, as Toby already mentioned, why FMO, through the Mobilizing Finance for Forest initiative and Good Energies, started to support us from the beginning. And that's why we are there where we are right now. So that is a very good thing. What is also a good thing, that it's all about transparency, as Lisa already mentioned. I think we are very open in our way of working and our business model. Well, this also gives confidence to people. Our combined services offerings, as how we designed it, with providing pre-finance technical assistance and supporting business development, that indeed bridges the gap between forest and finance. We quite invest a lot of time and effort in the onboarding and pre-feasibility processes of projects, and that ensures a quality pipeline and a proper success rate of projects. What is also important is that we match technological innovations with human craftsmanship and experiences for quality development of projects. I think Evelyn shared her experience on that as well. And we are building a balanced portfolio of removal and avoidance credits across continents, but that all have multiple benefits and revenue streams, and that creates a solid business case. And what also gives us some space in developing is that we have modest calculations and forecasting in our own business plan, and we can navigate a turbulent market. After a year, it's also good to look back and see what needs attention and how we can improve our work. Well, I don't want to complain again like others already did, but yeah, everything takes a lot of time at all different levels, at project level, investors level, buyers level. That has to do, of course, with decision-making processes, but also as it's still a new market, immature market, there's also a lack of capacity in the sector. I think it's also important for us to keep focusing on good pipeline building, and I think we can even put more effort in that and really visit even in a more early stage the projects to really understand the project design, the local stakeholder is involved, and the organization of aspects of the people we are working with. It's not said that we are not doing it, but I think it can be even be done better by us. And then what we've also learned, I think also already Evelien discussed that there are sometimes high expectations, and if you do a rough carbon calculation, a project can look very promising, but if you really do the deep dive and make it in compliance with the standards, well, you need to adjust numbers sometimes, which can also mean less revenue from a carbon project than expected. What we also see is that managing a carbon project is most times not the core business of a project proponent. So we also need to support, to provide more support in that as well. Well, and I think Toby already did some management of expectations here. That's, well, the practice of forestry projects in the south, well, they most times or sometimes disconnect with investors' policies. So there is some work to do if we really want to bring all those promises of money to the places where it's most needed. Well, we have to find each other and really connect and understand and move forward. And what we also see is you need a lot of patience in all processes, and that also means that you need money in early stages. So we also see that there is more grant funding needed, especially in the first stage of project implementation, for example, for community engagement, the first planting rounds, etc., etc. Well, then Michel also asked me to look ahead and share some dreams with you. I think they are related to the points mentioned earlier. But first thing, of course, what we have to do is deliver on our promise and develop 30 projects by 2030. I would really like to see us to extend our services offering after carbon certification, also provide assistance and guidance to the project proponents for implementing the carbon project. I would also love to see is that we can provide some additional financial support to a project owner in the first phase. So before the carbon revenues come in, I think that really supports the long sustainability of the project on the ground. And I think this really links to Toby. There are these big commitments, and what I really would like to see is that we build an investors community around us who is really willing to do the follow-up investments in the projects developed by Treevive. Well, and this is again the $1 million question. How can we find ways to tackle the dilemma of increasing scalability of tailor-made solutions? And as Lisa also mentioned, okay, we have really to work together and to contribute to strengthening the position of the VCM, because it's a crucial part of the climate solution. And I think it's one of the only mechanisms we have to direct public of private finance to the projects. And I would also like to see some further developments of an integral approach on valorization of biodiversity and community benefits in all projects. So in 2030, we aim to have invested at least 150 million in a portfolio of bankable high-quality carbon projects that sequester at least 35 million tons of carbon, and that we restore, conserve, and sustainably manage at least 2 million hectares of tropical forest landscape. And we cannot do that alone. We need you. We need the project owners that are in need of pre-financed development. We need the investors that see co-investment in nature-based solutions. And we, of course, also need the businesses that are willing to enter into long-term forward contracts for high-quality carbon credits. Now I hand over to Michel again.
Thanks, Lisbeth, and thanks to all the speakers over the last hour and a bit. I thank all the participants for their attention. I hope it was helpful. And as Lisbeth mentioned, do reach out to us if you feel that you can play some contribution to developing about 30 projects in 2030, as Lisbeth said. I wish you all a great day. I look forward to meeting you, and we look forward to engaging with you in the second year of our existence. Have a great day for now. Bye-bye.